Ladies and gentlemen, today we have received the biggest news that we have ever gotten to validate and secure that Palantir will be the winner of the $611 million deal given by the NHS in the coming months. Now, for those that don't know, the NHS is trying to overhaul its entire system. It is the largest healthcare system in the United Kingdom, the only real healthcare system that is nationalized in the United Kingdom, manages over 70 million people's healthcare data, and they've been inefficient for a long time. They've been ineffective, bureaucratic, have spent tens of billions of dollars on legacy IT infrastructure that has not gotten the job done. They want to move into a world that is data-driven, that actually allows analytics to be viewed at scale throughout hospitals across the entire country. And their PM, their newest PM, Rishi Sunak, is a techno-optimist. He believes in using technology in an optimistic way to guide the future. He is setting up massive AI regulations in the entire United Kingdom. So it's only likely that the NHS gives a deal of this magnitude to a company that is data-driven, AI-driven, and able to actually partner with them, not just give them some software and say, hey, download this, but actually be a real partner, consult with them, and be able to transform their entire operations, which is why this deal is worth over $500 million. Real quick, before we get into the video, please, one ask I have of you before you finish this video, subscribe to dailypalantir.com/subscribe. It's my daily email newsletter. We're about 2,000 subscribers, trying to get to 3,000 in the next couple months. 5 minutes every single day. You get to read some of the headlines, and you get an email around 7 p.m. every single day on Palantir. If you're a Palantir investor, you should be subscribed. It's free to subscribe. dailypalantir.com/subscribe. Links in the description. Please subscribe. All right, back to the video. Today at around 9:20 a.m., we got a deal that was very interesting. And it to me makes me feel like it is almost inevitable now that Palantir is going to be able to get this NHS contract. This is a big update. Get some popcorn, get some drinks. We're going to be here for about 20 minutes and talk about all the news related to this and go deeper into why I think Palantir is going to get this deal. NHS England has awarded a £25 million or $31 million contract to Palantir to transition to their federated data platform, which is the name of the newest platform that the NHS is creating to overhaul its entire operations. This is designed to provide the smooth transition and exit service of critical products that were developed to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, which Palantir played a massive role in being able to establish, to alternative provisions, including the transition of products to the new FDP-AS supplier following competition of the procurement process and award to the FDP-AS supplier, according to the description on the contract's website. Now, this is the article I want to look at. They gave a lot of details on the register.com for what is going on here. Let's take a look at this and then we'll analyze a little bit more. NHS England, the health department Quango, first departed working with the US data analytics company Palantir during the height of the pandemic, when they led to a $1.7 million deal, then a $29 million deal signed in December 2020 without competition. The reason there was no competition is not because they didn't want to procure from other people. It's because there were no other people that could do what Palantir was able to do as quickly as Palantir was able to do. And the competition point is going to matter a little bit as we get into the public perception of this in a little bit. The deal was subject to the threat of judicial review from campaigners who argued that the contract represented such a change in data usage, it warranted public consultation under British data protection law, which is fair. In the United Kingdom and in most places throughout Europe, if you're going to do a contract that is going to immediately change the way users data is inputted into different systems, which is exactly what Palantir was going to be able to do, then the public needs to be able to understand that, consult with that, all that stuff. NHS England later agreed not to extend Palantir's contract beyond the pandemic without consulting the public. So during the pandemic, because there was no other competitors to be able to actually establish a modern healthcare system to distribute vaccines, etc., Palantir was awarded the contract, but the NHS was facing so much backlash because they didn't consult with the public, because they didn't have time to consult with the public. They said, okay, we're not going to extend the contract, but for now, let us do what we need to do. In January, they then extended that deal by 6 months for a value of about $14 million, the maximum 50% value extension allowed without competition under UK public procurement law. So because they still needed Palantir so deeply, they gave them another $15 million. It's like they're begging to give Palantir their money, but because of the backlash from the public, they're not able to officially get it done. At the time, tech law campaign group Foxglove said it had not seen any of the consultation they promised during the last legal round over the COVID data store. That deal came to an end on June 11th. So what has happened today? Well, this is what we are getting today in the context of Palantir. Palantir currently supports the Faster Data Flow program, which sees the government extract patient data from hospitals. It will also become part of the FDP program. Given that Palantir currently supports several data projects expected to become part of the FDP program, these are different siloed projects that they're working on with the NHS, critics have argued it is at an unfair advantage in the £480 million or $611 million competition. NHS England argues it is a fair and open competition. Now, this quote by Sam Smith is incredibly important, who's the health privacy campaign group at at Confidential. He says, this is their interoperability, moving data in secret from one Palantir to another. If senior staff believe in the competitive dialogue they're running or believed in interoperability at all, they would have said that every process in the current Palantir side of the data store will be published for reuse. It's not that the process is necessarily corrupt, but small decisions keep getting made that favor the incumbent because those doing the work think that's what NHS England wants and what leadership also wants them to do. Now, what does this all mean in the context of Palantir? There's a couple of things. The NHS giving Palantir a $31 million contract to essentially transition the current data in the faster data flow program and the variety of other programs that Palantir is working with the NHS into the federated data platform, to me, is a signal that the NHS realizes that, number one, we need to transition all the existing programs into this new system. It's kind of like you have, a bunch of fruits that you guys have been farming. Now we're building an entire fruit bucket that we're going to start shipping out to a bunch of people, and all those fruits need to come into this bucket. That fruit bucket is the federated data platform. That is going to be what manages 67 million people's healthcare data in the United Kingdom. Palantir has been working on various programs throughout the past couple of years with the NHS, and now it's time for all of that to come consolidate into one FDP. So my question here is, why is the UK, why is NHS England giving Palantir 31 million bucks to start transitioning all that data into a federated data platform and not give them the entire $611 million deal? It would be very concerning and honestly very weird for the FDP to be the federated data platform, which is like the $611 million deal, to be managed by some other company or some other group of companies, and Palantir is transitioning the data into the FDP because they've been working on all these programs that are inevitably going to become part of the FDP, so it only makes sense that they're transitioning the data from those programs, right? That makes total sense. But it doesn't make sense for them to do that if they're not also managing the FDP. Because then, imagine if like Amazon wins this contract. I'm just throwing it out there, and Amazon's managing the FDP. You've got programs that Palantir has created, data that Palantir has worked with, hospitals that Palantir has consulted with, entire like academic institutions that Palantir is working with to be able to create the bridge between how hospitals are working and how healthcare is actually provided to patients. All of that data going into this new platform that's managed by some other random company that has nothing to do with Foundry, has nothing to do with AIP, has nothing to do with the actual services that Palantir has provided, that it, by the way, has reduced the backlogs by 28% in different hospitals in the UK. It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. So to me, today was the final nail in the coffin. Today was the day where the NHS was like, look, we're not going to say that you won the contract because we can't say it yet, but if we're going to use your transition services of all the data that exists into the federated data platform, you're obviously managing the entire federated data platform. It also creates a lot of inefficiencies because the way data is managed, for example, by an Amazon and an FDP is not going to be the same way that Palantir manages it. Like, you need an actual operating system. This is what we're talking about, an operating system for patients' healthcare data in order for this to make sense. So one company that's transitioning all the data into another company's platform, there's going to be a ton of butting heads in terms of how do you manage that data within that company's platform if that company has a different form of governance, different form of regulations, different tech stack in terms of how they're building and establishing the data. It just doesn't make sense. It does not make sense for another company to be managing the FDP and for Palantir to be able to transition the data into that FDP. It makes a lot of sense for Palantir's FDP, Federated Data Platform, to be the FDP that wins the $611 million contract, and for Palantir to take all the existing programs they have already been working with over the past couple of months and bring them into the FDP, which takes a lot of money, takes a lot of resources, which is why they got this $31 million deal. So I think this deal is happening. I mean, I think, I've been pretty bullish on this deal for a long time, but I think this deal, today's contract was one of those things where it's kind of like, how much more obvious can you get? That if you're going to transition the data and pay us $31 million, like, you couldn't have paid someone else a couple million. You got to pay us 31 million. Yeah, you're paying us 31 million because it's probably part of that whole 611 million of us to actually establish the entire platform. Now, in terms of competition, what the quote we just read in the article was one of the directors of a medical group who says, look, people think it's unfair because Palantir has been the incumbent, and as a result of it being unfair, this is a inadequate procurement process from the UK. I have two responses to this. Number one, Palantir is not the incumbent. Palantir was called during the time for the pandemic to be able to distribute vaccines because there was no competition. There was no company that in, I think, a couple of months could set up the infrastructure Palantir was able to set up to then be able to administer what the NHS wanted it to do in terms of vaccine distribution. So Palantir was never the incumbent in the NHS. That was a $30 million deal. That's not being the incumbent. That was just the only company that could get the job done. So when these directors of all these different medical groups are like, oh, it's an unfair process, it's unfair procurement, the NHS is not consulting with the public, Palantir is the only one that can get the job done. If anyone else could get the job done, they would have put in a bid. The problem is they can't put in a bid because they can't get the job done. And they definitely can't get the job done at the level of what Rishi Sunak, who is the PM of the UK, which is another really important part to the story, wants it to get done at. He is a techno-optimist. He believes in really making the UK one of the prime areas for companies to be able to innovate and for AI jobs to develop. Andreessen Horowitz, a multi-billion-dollar venture capitalist firm, just opened up their first international offices in the United Kingdom. And that's because the PM, Rishi Sunak, is becoming very welcoming of these companies. He wants more AI-driven data analytics companies to start in the UK. Palantir just opened up their entire headquarters for AI development in the United Kingdom. Palantir has recruited heads of AI and digital strategy, Indra Joshi, who's one of the directors, former directors at the NHS for AI and data strategy, to Palantir. She now works at Palantir. She also follows me on Twitter, which is super cool. So it just seems like everything is lining up to the point where, yes, the procurement process you could argue is unfair, but that's what happens in a 0-to-1 strategy. It's unfair because there is no competition, so you get to gobble up the entire market because no one else can do what you can do. Now, in regards to the competitors on this unfair point that try to compete, my second big response here is this article on PalantirDaily.com. Or dailypalantir.com. A Palantir consortium of competitors throw in the towel. I published this article I think on April 18th, which is, well, let's just read a little bit of it. In a recent development reported by Digital Health, the UK consortium vying for the opportunity to manage the NHS's $611 million FTP platform has been unsuccessful, according to Shane Tickle, CEO and founder of the consortium member Volar Health Technologies. This was a bunch of companies that were legacy IT companies that came together in the UK, said, hey, we're going to compete against Palantir. And that was unsuccessful a couple months ago. The consortium, which includes database firm Eclipse and software provider Blackbear, had hoped to rival US data analytics titan Palantir for the lucrative contract. And then the article goes into saying that they weren't able to get it done. I'll leave the contract in the description, or the article in the description, but the point is they threw in the towel, right? And that was my thumbnail I made for it. I thought I was really proud of this thumbnail. They weren't able to get the job done. And so if they weren't able to get the job done, this whole concept of like unfair procurement or unfair competition, it just doesn't make sense to me because like they tried. Volar Health, Blackbear, they tried to put in a bid. They just couldn't get the job done. One of the I had someone on Twitter DM me who is the son of one of the people who's like one of the head executives at one of these consortium companies, and his son was messaging me on Twitter from the UK that his dad even thinks they have no shot against Palantir, and his dad is like a top level executive at one of these companies, and that was back in like end of March. And that's when I was thinking, I was like, yeah, like this consortium that's coming out here that's saying, oh, we're gonna like challenge Palantir. It's like first of all, there's too many cooks in the kitchen is not good, right? So if you have 15 cooks in the kitchen trying to build up this FTP to manage 70 million people's healthcare data, when for the past 30 years nothing has been able to work to solve the NHS from a digital perspective, that's likely not what Rishi Sunak is going for. And again, I think Rishi Sunak is a big part of the story because having watched interviews of him, having watched them literally mention Palantir live in many of the conferences that he's been talking at, he's not the type of guy that's trying to BS around. He's not the type of guy that's trying to just, massage the public of the UK and give this contract to a bunch of random United Kingdom companies that probably can't innovate, probably can't get the job done, probably can't actually establish anything meaningful in regards to digital transformation. It seems like he wants to give the deal to someone that can get the job done. And the person that can get the job done, in my opinion, is going to be Alex Karp and Palantir. Rishi Sunak on June 7, 2023, met with Alex Karp at a baseball game in Washington, D.C. Look, you're not meeting with you're not meeting with someone at a baseball game just for fun. You're likely meeting with them because you're trying to get this deal done and you're trying to get this deal to happen as soon as possible. Now, one last thing I want to read. I did a video on this before. But I just want to show this. Palantir is partnered with the Cleveland Clinic and Tampa Bay General Hospital in the United States. They power 13% of beds in the entire United States. And an article by CNBC dropped that I'll also put in the description, which was a great article around what they've been able to do. Since the official launch of Palantir software on March 1, the Cleveland Clinic main campus has been able to accept an 8% increase in patient transfers from other hospitals. That means more revenue for the Cleveland Clinic and more impact for lives that can be helped from people that need to work, or people that are looking for care now that they can be transferred into the hospital. In fact, Palantir's system proved to be so useful that Papa said some members of her team expressed fear that they were going to be replaced by it. Once she reassured them the platform is just meant to serve as a tool, she said they've grown to love it. They've developed a trust in the system, Papa said. People in healthcare are kind of conservative, they don't like change. So the fact that they've trusted it and are using it now really just says that it's a successful venture for us. This has massive implications. This was one of the best articles I've ever read in terms of Palantir's ability to work in the healthcare system, because they consulted with companies to be able to build actual software. It's called Palantir for Hospital Operations, in order for the nurses, the people that are actually using the software, to love it, to trust it, to want to use it, to make their lives more effective and easier and better. That R&D that Palantir has been able to do over the past 2 years in the healthcare space is only going to help them expand more as they work with other healthcare institutions like Cardinal Health, which is one of the major healthcare institutions they signed a deal with back in December, because of the work that they were able to do, because of the data they were able to generate and the network effects that data has in terms of the R&D they're able to do with new healthcare companies. So that initial 2 years of consulting that people think, is a waste of time, you're not selling the software, it's not scalable, is actually the moat of Palantir. It is the most scalable because those 2 years of consulting that started in 2021 with Tampa Bay General and Cleveland Clinic has led to Palantir being able to be in the running for this $611 million contract with the NHS. The work they were able to do to be able to make hospitals more efficient in the United States and take all of that research, take all of that data, and then be able to establish what it would look like in the United Kingdom is exactly why they have a competitive advantage, is exactly why their model is scalable, and is exactly why no other competitors can compete with them. Because what other data analytics / healthcare provider has done 2 years of solid R&D, failing and then eventually succeeding, working with smaller institutions, to then be able to say we have the confidence to transform a 70 million persons healthcare system? There's just not that many people out there. And that's why that consortium of clients that tried to compete for this contract ended up failing back in April with the United Kingdom. This deal is important. I've said this many times, but if we get this deal, forget the $611 million, which is going to be great. By the way, Palantir got a price target upgrade from $15 to $18 today by Raymond James. They followed Bank of America, so we're seeing kind of a lot of banks come in line. Now, they downgraded them from outperform to strong buy, or strong buy to outperform. So they downgraded the buy or sell because they think it's getting a little bit frothy in the valuation, but they still upgraded the price. Outside of the price, outside of the stock, outside of what's going to happen to the company, if we successfully over the next 5 years transform the NHS's entire healthcare operations, that's going to be worth a lot more than $500 million, because Denmark, Sweden, Germany, all the other nationalized, socialized healthcare systems of the world that are inefficient, ineffective, are going to look at what Palantir did with the UK. And I think it's going to be a very easy sales conversation for Alex Karp to go to those heads of state and be like, hey, you guys want to provide quality healthcare. In order to do that without a free market, you need technology. Because if you're not going to have a free market, have forces to be able to establish like the way healthcare works in the United States, which is not perfect, but it's definitely more effective and efficient than what's going on in the UK, then you need technology. You need software. And we have the best technology and software. And you don't have to take our word for it. You can take the word of 70 million people that are not having to have wait times go up to a couple of weeks just to meet with their doctors. And that's happening in the United Kingdom. This is a big deal. This is one of those deals that's going to be a pivotal deal for the trajectory of this company. And if we don't get this deal, it's going to be pretty bad, which is why I think, Palantir's positioned themselves to a point where they're going to get this deal. I think this $31 million contract they got today all but confirms that this deal is happening, because why else would Palantir get this deal if they weren't establishing the entire system? And if they do get this deal, it's going to be a pretty big deal. It's going to be a pretty big deal. So those are my thoughts. Thanks so much for listening and watching. Palantir, new $31 million contract. Let's see where it goes from there. I'll see you guys in the next one.